I think accessibility and practicality have always been really important to me. And look, that's not hard. If we're translating herbalism, like this has been a part of life for humanity for far longer than most anything we're doing now, so it can definitely be woven in, but we've forgotten that. So I'm trying to sort of show, look, this can be practical and simple and easy and functional and just part of your life, even if your life is living in New York City, today.
You've just met Rachelle Robinett, and you're listening to the LabAroma podcast with me, your host, Colleen Quinn. At LabAroma, we believe the secret to truly effective and therapeutic plant medicine is through understanding our plant science and backing that up with evidence. And this week, I have the absolute pleasure to sit down with a woman who is completely inspiring in not just her educational background, her clinical and therapeutic experience, but also her drive and ambition within her work on our plant world as well as our natural wellness space. Rachelle is a registered clinical herbalist, holistic health practitioner, and the founder of Pharmakon Supernatural. Now, the company is dedicated to exploring the art of functional nature, which is a fascinating concept within itself, and you're going to learn all about it in our beautiful conversation. Now, Rachelle combines and continues to combine her knowledge of herbal and traditional medicine, health science, and lifestyle design into plant-based products that are accessible. Therefore, self-care. She provides so much beautiful self-care content for those seeking to connect with modern life and natural wellness, and that connection is so important, especially in our busy lives. Now, in addition to managing Pharmakon Supernatural, Rachelle is also the creator of HRBLS, which is herbal remedy gummies for stress, anxiety relief, energy endurance, and digestive health. She is a busy lady and doing incredible work. Jump in and learn all about this amazing woman and the beautiful work she does in our space. Rachelle, thank you so much and welcome to the LabAroma podcast. I'm delighted to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
So I have so many questions for you. I don't really know where to start. Can we start at the very beginning and talk to me about your relationship between plants and people? It seems to be in everything you've done throughout your career and even your study, it's been about plants and people. Where did that all start for you? Do you remember?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up really steeped in nature and in the kind of implications of what we take in through our senses, if it's food, drink, ideas, movement, all these different things. My parents were very aware of those things and pushed us to be aware of them as well. As is fairly typical of children, I think I also resisted a lot of that and thought, well, this is nice and this will be, integral to my personality, but this is not how I want to make a career, or sort of organize my life. And so I would say it's very sort of inherent, but there was a, period of time where I was pursuing other things intellectually and from a career standpoint. But long story short, after fulfilling some of these needs that I had, which included moving to New York and working in fashion, I realized these things that are inherent are actually even more important for me to kind of go to and go into and push out into the world. So that is sort of where, Supernatural came from.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. At what point were you living what we all assume is the big dream? Were you living in the fashion world in New York? But was it that sexy?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're like, actually, plants are the thing.
It was that sexy. I have to be honest. A lot of people have these stories of like, oh my God, I got in and I hated it. And it was crazy. And like, look, it was crazy, but it was my dream and it came true. It was a great, great time. I did not burn out on it and I still love it. What happened was more of a realization that I've achieved something. And suddenly it didn't feel like it was going to be my entire life. And I didn't feel like I needed to do it again and again and again, So I moved forward, which meant moving beyond it and kind of outside of it.
How did that feel? Like, what does it
Mm.
feel whenever the thing that's your dream, all of a sudden, as much as it's beautiful when you're in it, you realize, actually, this is not going to be my forever thing? Is that scary, exciting? How does it feel?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm in a little bit of that moment again now, suddenly. And I think for the first time, it was surprising, but it was also exciting. It felt very positive. There's a lot of, I mean, I really like change and I really like the unknown. So I think that made it feel positive to me. And I was clearly surprised because as far as I knew, this was going to be my life. I was working in fashion forever. Um, but it felt positive because it felt like I wasn't leaving because I either I didn't do what I came to do, or, I wasn't able to quote unquote make it. It was like, oh gosh, I made it. And now what's next? So it felt like a graduation.
Yeah, I
Um,
like that. That's a very
yeah.
positive spin on it, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
it's good.
always, finding words for these sensations it's always a fun exercise, and sometimes you don't know until you say it. You sort of realize that is what it felt like.
Yeah, yeah, it's beautiful. Um, Talk to me about travel, because travels was or maybe it still is a huge part of your life. I know COVID's probably put a bit of a stop to that for a while, but how much of that desire to travel and the traveling you've done has been interwoven with your love of plants and your study of herbalism?
Yeah, it is a huge part of my life. It's one of my greatest priorities is to build a life that allows for travel, and it feels like my ultimate sort of indulgence, but also it's essential for my well-being and my life, yeah. And it sometimes it is directly related to my work, and sometimes it's not. The interesting thing about, working in the well-being space and in herbalism, as you know, and anybody in this space knows, it it becomes, almost anything in your life becomes information for the work then, because health is so holistic. So I could go on a quote unquote vacation with no intention of it being related to work, but I'll probably learn something or experience something that, I'll bring back to work, quote unquote work. And sometimes it's explicit. Like I'll I ran a retreat in Costa Rica, co-hosted a retreat in Costa Rica with plant medicine and all of that. And so that, is a very literal sort of exploration of plants. So I would say that the main point of travel as it relates to my study is that I use it as a way to study myself, as a way to study the human experience. So, what does it feel like to change as a result of travel, which I find is almost impossible to avoid? I love it for that. What does it feel like to be alone? I do a lot of trips alone. What does it feel like to be, in solitude or to have psychedelic experiences? So I definitely use travel as a way of going inward and going outward, and bringing back then those learnings to my life, that I sometimes just sort of leave behind in order to do this.
I think I love what you say about how it's you can travel with the intention of it being work, and I like how you do
Mm.
in quotes in quotes, but you also, when you're passionate about what your work is or passionate about the thing that you spend your time doing, it's everywhere, especially when you
Mm-hmm.
travel, because you discover new medicines and new plants and new cultures and new
Mm.
ways of working with the plants. I think that's unavoidable, especially when we work in the plant space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so inspiring to
Mm.
encounter different food and drink and local, flora and fauna and traditional ways of working. Yeah, it's just endless, endless. I love it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. So you have this really interesting approach, or I don't want to call it the concept. It is more of an approach to supernatural, and that is that you want to aim to bring, or you work towards bringing the history of like global nature and herbalism into our daily lives as modern busy humans. How? So firstly, Rachelle, why is that important to you, and how do you do that?
Yeah, so it's this sort of agnostic global approach to herbalism is just my own personal path. I sort of toured all of these different healing traditions, and I felt most comfortable and most sincere working from a place of, sort of agnosticism, in terms of, I'm not a strict Ayurvedic practitioner. I'm not a strict traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. And those are expertises that you can spend your entire life becoming fluent in. And my approach has just been a little bit more pulled back and kind of drawing from these different traditions where they resonate with people, or where I see the opportunity to, work with them best. So for me, that's just been my path. It's been the thing that felt the most honest in terms of my study and presentation. And then, I find it most productive to meet people where they are. And in my community, that tends to be, fairly urban. And obviously we're all modern, living this modern life. So I'm less inclined to try to push somebody into a different way of living, or into a specific lineage, than I am to say, let's bring this to you. Let's modify this and kind of meet halfway, or meet closer to where you are, and then, walk together in a certain direction that you want to go in. So I think accessibility and practicality have always been really important to me. And look, that's not hard. If we're translating herbalism, like, this has been a part of life for humanity for far longer than most anything we're doing now, so it can definitely be woven in, but we've forgotten that. So I'm trying to sort of show, look, this can be practical and simple and easy and functional, and just a part of your life, even if your life is living in New York City, today. So
do you feel, or have you seen, Rachelle, that the growth of climate change awareness has led to community gardens? I know there's other things that have led to the growth of community gardens and people being more in touch with nature, even in those, compacted urban settings. How much do you think that community movement in pockets has helped people become more aware, just kind of like to remind them that, we've been using plants for centuries and centuries? Do you think that's been a factor at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. I think there are a lot of factors right now that are converging and acting as you said, reminders that these things are important, and that they, were primary, and that not only are they important, but some of these things like climate change are absolutely essential for our future well-being. So yeah, I think it's interesting to watch climate change awareness, and also, which these are intertwined, but the kind of alternative meat space and alternative dairy spaces are huge drivers in the food world. And then you have obviously the popularity of wellness in the last decade becoming this enormous sort of trend, and things like cannabis and adaptogens, and people, being marketed to and recognizing that, there are these botanical ingredients that can be very powerful. And then of course psychedelics. So there, and, several more things, which I'm not thinking of right now, but I think it's kind of coming in from multiple different angles to push us in a certain direction that I hope, we continue in.
Yeah, hopefully. But I think there's, as you say, there's a lot of different things coming together at the one time, that there's a tipping point. If we're not there, it's just around the corner.
Yeah, somebody asked me probably years ago at this point, the pendulum is swinging. Do you think it'll swing back? And I think you've described it better. I don't think it's actually a pendulum swing. I think it's more of a tipping point, and we're not, we're not going back from this. We're beyond that point.
Yeah, no, we're moving forward. And I think, we could talk about all the factors that are at play here, but I do, in our world of aromatic medicine, I've seen COVID having a huge impact on people now thinking, okay, it's not about fixing me when I'm ill. It's about me being healthy every day so I don't get ill. And what's the best way to do that? People typically and traditionally lean into plants for that in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's been a massive help. If there's any kind of silver lining, if such a thing exists from a pandemic, I think that awareness of the power of plants as a supportive wellness tool has been really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with you. The sort of teach me about immunity, teach me about prevention, teach me about recovery. I am so, suddenly the degree of open-mindedness was just explosive, right? Like,
yeah,
I will hear anything you have to say if there's a chance it's going to help me. So yeah, I agree with you there for sure.
Yeah, when I first studied, and we talked a lot. I was taught by a French lady. Well, she was an adopted French lady, I should say. But we talked about terrain a lot and supporting the terrain, meaning like our actual, our terrain, like literally the landscape of our body and supporting it. And outside of that room, no one's ever talked to me about terrain until the last couple of years. And then people are like, this body that I live in, how do I support it on a day to day? And people are saying like, I want a stronger terrain. I'm like, keep saying that word to me. This is exactly what we're doing with aromatic and herbal medicine, is building a stronger terrain so that you can handle whatever you're doing in this modern world.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that.
It's nice. Can I shift you into female health?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so hormones. As two women, let's talk about them.
Yeah.
I can hear all the men jumping off the podcast. So hormone balancing, and so two things, Rachelle: hormone balancing and being aware of our hormones, and which herbs and essential oils and plants are most helpful whenever we're out of balance. That seems to be a topic that people are really talking about. It's definitely something that we're seeing coming into our support inbox a lot more now than we ever did before. Can you talk to us about some of the top herbs that you would lean into when you're dealing with some kind of like hormonal imbalances?
Absolutely. And what I always like to start with is just the reminder that, not a reminder to you, but a reminder to anyone who may not be thinking this way already, that we tend to say hormones and we tend to mean sex hormones, but there are also the stress hormones and there are also the sleep hormones. And of course, the whole system is very much, one system. So, I when I have, sort of the hormone balance class, for example, we go into all of that and not just the sex hormones. But in terms of those, it will obviously depend on which hormones are imbalanced and in what way they're imbalanced. What are we trying to raise? What are we trying to lower? And, I sort of describe the human system as a symphony, and there are all these different players, and we can't just, pull one string or turn up one thing. It's one whole organism. So if we're trying to, adjust one level, we have to consider the others. And also that, and this goes for anything, it doesn't have to be hormones, but sometimes the way to get the result that you want is not to actually work right on the spot, right? Or right on the symptom. It might be back 3 steps or something in order to open up a pathway for something to, raise or lower. So with hormones, I will do a lot of liver support, since the liver is so important in cleaning, hormones out of the system and helping us to just be our quote unquote normal best. So that's always part of it. And then I would say some of the classic herbs that get used for female sex hormones in my practice would be chaste or vitex. It's chaste treeberry or vitex, black cohosh, licorice, sage, motherwort. It's kind of a fantastic blend for so many things. But it's tricky, because I sort of rattle through that, and it's like, that'll be right for somebody, but not right for someone else. So it really does depend on your unique chemistry and your needs, and obviously where you are in your life and age and, stress levels and all of that. But those are a few of my favorites. Yeah.
I like that. I know that one of the big areas is, two big areas that we get asked a lot about is the menopause. And even now, maybe even a bigger conversation is perimenopause. And I'm making a complete assumption here, but I'm assuming that's because the menopause is a conversation where there is educational resources out there, or there's signposting where women can get assistance. whereas perimenopause feels to be a conversation that's newer in a way. It's certainly over in Europe anyway, but it is becoming a big conversation where women are like, okay, do you know what? I'm early stage menopause and I want to get on this early. I want to understand what's happening to my body. I want to get plants in here so that I maybe don't need to take, hormone replacement therapy or whatever it is. Are you seeing any of that kind of movement in your world where perimenopause is becoming nearly like a women are saying, I want to understand it earlier, as opposed to waking up and realizing I'm in the middle of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you said it. There's a greater awareness, and there's going to be more, people going through it in the coming decades too. So it's definitely, I would say that menopause, perimenopause, and then earlier it's transition off of birth control. I find a lot of questions around that, right? Those are probably the three, aside from just I'm living my life and my hormones feel out of whack and I need help with that. But those are the three, I would say, like sort of transition points. Yeah. And that herb blend that I mentioned is actually one of the best for perimenopause and menopausal symptoms. So, the motherwort and chaste, licorice, black cohosh, sage. You could vary it a little bit and do like passion flower and hops for insomnia, which is really common. But I mean, yeah, if you're thinking about perimenopause, it's such a great mindset to be in too, because getting in a habit of using some of these things and building your foundation can really create a gentler experience and a nicer transition. Yeah.
I was just going to say it just takes you through that transition with a bit more love and ease.
Yeah, exactly.
So fertility. Fertility is a really interesting conversation. I'm kind of grateful we don't get a massive amount of questions about fertility. But as we work towards a younger audience within LabAroma, I'm sure it'll come. Fertility is definitely a huge area. And I like how you mentioned the concept of coming off birth control, and because coming off birth control for some women, it's very simple to them. They come off, they conceive within a few months, and it's smooth and beautiful. That's not the norm a lot of the time, where women can be in birth control for 10 years and then hope to have a baby within, a couple of months get pregnant within a couple of months or a year. And it doesn't happen. And it's incredibly frustrating, and it can be devastating for women and couples. It can be awful. Is there anything in terms of herbs for fertility? And when I say this, Rachelle, I mean, I had fertility issues when I was in my 20s, and I remember an amazing acupuncturist said to me, I was very much like, let's fix this and move on. I'm sure there's loads of women in their 20s and 30s like that are like, okay, this is a stumbling block, a hurdle. I want to knock it down and get on with life. And that was definitely my Rambo, like the bull in the china shop attitude. But this amazing acupuncturist said to me, he said, you're never going to plant flowers in a garden until the garden is healthy.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I've never, ever forgot that. It was the best advice. And I now use that in my mind for everything. You're never going to create a body of work that is truly, authentically what you want to deliver to the world and be received that way if your mind and your body is not in a healthy place to produce it. It's the same thing. For me, it's the same thing. And I definitely I probably leaned into herbs a lot more than I did essential oils when I was going through that phase of my life. And it was a long phase. It was like five or 6 years.
Yeah.
And I was so grateful for them at the time. Is there any particular herbs that you lean into or you rely on when it comes to fertility or treating that infertility situation?
There are many, and that analogy is so perfect. Fertility is fascinating because it is, I mean, talk about holistic, right? It is, it's the entire garden, and it's, your body generally is going to deprioritize fertility, right? Until everything else feels like it's in a great place. And that can be a lot of work. It can be a little bit of work, but for a lot of people, I think if there's a challenge, then it can be quite a journey, and that journey can include mental health and gut health and immunity and also hormone balance and all these different things. So there are really, really interesting relationships between the different systems in the body that seem unrelated, like the immune system and fertility. So when I work with clients on fertility, we really, I mean, it's always holistic, but we kind of have to, with fertility, I find that you just sort of have to continue to maintain the holistic mindset as opposed to like narrowing and narrowing and narrowing. It tends to be, we're still looking at your psychological health. We're still looking at your sleep. We're still looking at your gut and your hormones, and we're keeping it all in mind, the entire time. So for that reason, we can use herbs for hormone balance. We could use things like adaptogens or nervines to help with stress levels in the nervous system. We could use nourishing herbs that, are sort of like a multivitamin and just are going to provide, vitamins and minerals. Sometimes we're working at the endocrine level. Sometimes we're working on the immune system. Sometimes it's about digestion and absorption, so you can absorb all of these nutrients. Let's see. So to name some herbs, gosh, I mean, I just kind of gave so many categories that it could be many, many things, but maybe it's nettle, alfalfa, oat, red clover, in the nourishing category. Maybe it's aphrodisiacs, maca, cacao, lavender, the adaptogens, ashwagandha is such a classic support.
But it works.
It does. I would say, and it works.
Yeah, and it works.
Yeah, it does. It works for so many things. That's a great one.
And I think that for fertility, and for lots of conditions, but especially fertility, it's such a holistic problem. And I hate calling it a problem. It's maybe the challenge is a better word, but it's so holistic and it's so psychological in a way as well, because our body is never going to get to that place where it's comfortable enough and healthy enough to conceive when our stress and anxiety is through the roof and affecting our physical health, especially the likes, as you say, our gut health and our immune system. It's kind of this vicious cycle that it's really hard to break.
Absolutely. And it can exacerbate itself, right? So if we start to worry about, fertility, then that becomes this added stress, and the whole goal is to reduce the stress, right? So
yeah. Is it becoming more and more common, or is infertility just something that is consistently being problematic in our society? Do you see a difference in the past few years?
That is a question that I don't actually know the answer to. I'm not aware. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's been to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if it's more of a challenge given the related health challenges that are just continuing to increase in this country, especially. In my practice, I haven't noticed a big change, but I'm such a, just a snapshot of the entire picture. So I'm not actually sure.
It's interesting. It's an interesting field, I suppose. Okay, last question, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Two questions, I suppose, Rachelle. So I know you said at the start of the conversation that you're in a bit of a transition. Don't worry, you don't have to divulge stuff. When you're in a transition, the last thing you want to do is talk about it. Until you try to transition, the point is you don't know what you're doing, so let's not go there. So I do mean this on a personal level. I mean this on an herbal level. What do you hope for or envision for the future of herbal medicine? And I know it's a really big question, but if you thought about it for a second, what deep down in your soul or your gut would be what you would really like to see happen to the practice of herbal medicine?
Well, I would love to see us overcome the fear around using herbs in daily life as allies, as, food medicine, as just a way of being well and connected to nature. Just kind of get back to a place where it's normal and it's comfortable, and most of us do it, and we're not afraid of it, and it's not suspect. That on an individual level. And then on a grander scale, I would love to see more of what you see with the use of traditional Chinese medicine, for example, where the healthcare system is combining, its current tools with more herbalism, and the two are being used together, which is really powerful. And there's no reason that we can't do that. So I really hope to see that, long term in from a healthcare systemic standpoint.
That would just make a profound change.
Absolutely. It would just enable everyone to be better, to do their jobs better. It would just be better.
It would be amazing. So you're a busy lady and there's lots of stuff going on in your world. Is there anything in particular you're particularly passionate about right now?
I am especially eager to talk to people about these themes that keep coming up, that, I get questions. We all get questions, individual questions all day long, really. And in that position, you can start to see these themes emerge, right? So I'm really interested in kind of pulling back and talking about those themes, talking about motivations and drivers of change, and being less focused on what's the herb for X and more focused on how can we, build a life in which we are more connected and happier and healthier and, syncing with nature, which includes our own body and mind. And I think
That's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to say that, from the beginning, it's been really important for me to feel like people feel empowered and educated when they encounter whatever we're doing here. And I just want to continue kind of articulating the functional power of nature for us to be vitally alive and vibrantly well. So
I love that. It's a beautiful note to end on. Rachelle, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. I did too.
Yeah, it was lovely. Thank you for the work you do. But also thank you for taking the time to share it with us. I feel very honored to have you in the podcast. I know that the LabAroma community will just love to hear this conversation. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you.
Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the LabAroma podcast. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you share it with family and friends. And if you share it on social media, don't hesitate to give us a tag. You can also subscribe to the podcast over on Spotify, iTunes, or Google Podcast so you never miss an episode again. Until next time, take care.